global GDP is, let's call it 60 trillion. JP Morgan has derivatives on their books for 90 trillion. And they say, well, it's not risk really because it's perfectly hedged. All the counterparties are completely safe. And yet look what just happened for MF Global. There's no counterparty accountability there. Look what happened during 2008. There were no counterparties accountability there. There's gross risk. It's not net risk. That's 90 trillion in risk. They're not hedged at all. And how can you hedge 700 trillion in bets on an economy?
But here's the question. Here's the question. As the firemen, the police, the bureaucrats lose their future, will the police still not care that they've been robbed just because they can still crack somebody on the head? I mean, that's really what's valuable. Or is there any end from your research to how bad this is going to get? Because certainly they have a escape route, and that's more power, world government, total tyranny in their own words. But, I mean, they've got a problem, as Zbigniew Brzezinski said last year to the Council on Foreign Relations in Canada, their branch. He said, look, the world is awake and staring at the elite, not at our puppets anymore. We're in deep trouble. So even their own technocrats are warning them that they're not going to get away with this. Even if they start World War III, that isn't going to make people circle the wagons around the little bankers.
Well, what they count on is the response you see in almost all incidents of rape. Rape victims tend to blame themselves. And this is what the elites count on. They know that if they steal all your money, you're going to blame yourself. And I know working on Wall Street myself, that was the attitude. When I call up a customer and I tell them, hey, I just lost all of your money, typically the customer will blame themselves. And this is what people count on. I know when I was working on Wall Street, this is what we found. We try to find customers that were gambleaholics. We try to find emotionally weak customers that'll blame themselves for the money you steal from them. And this is what they do, but on a much bigger scale. So a pension account that's worth a few $100 million, if they steal $2 or $3 million or $4 billion, the pension manager will feel bad about themselves, and they'll put their tail between their legs and they'll scurry home to wherever they're living, the little hovel, and they'll cry to themselves to sleep all night. But that's what you count on, because nobody's going to.
Oh, I know. I've seen when the government takes people's children for no reason, they'll still somehow blame themselves. And I see this psychology all the time. I mean, it really is the Stockholm Syndrome.
Well, you know, the thing is, you learn on Wall Street. When I was on Wall Street, what I was told was for a couple of things. First of all, it doesn't matter if you break the law because we have lawyers, you know. And second of all, unless you have at least one case pending against you from a disgruntled customer, you're not showing enough initiative. I mean, that's the law of the Wall Street. And the way you're paid on Wall Street is not on the money you make for customers, but on the churn factor. How much of the customer's money did you turn into the firm's money? And you do that by excessive trading. And typically, brokers will churn customers, and they'll turn it over and turn 10 or 20% of the customer's account will be
and the most criminal rise to the top. And they think the police state's going to protect them from the crimes they've committed. Let's go to your phone calls. If you just joined us, the head of the CME group, this is big news, Terrence Duffy, has gone public and said that he was told, and he told the Justice Department this, in meetings with MF Global top brass, that they were ordered by Corzine to steal the private bank accounts. This is bank robbery digital. And you're seeing a giant attempt by MF Global and by JP Morgan, reportedly, who got most of the money, to just have it in plain view and see if you'll buy it. And the Justice Department and the rest of these terrorists who ship guns to Mexico and cocaine into the country and get caught, they don't get in trouble either, just to see if they can get away with this. And I want to go to calls here, Max, but that point you raised about the gold, we'll have to cover that after we get to some calls, because that's destroying the commodities market in gold and silver. But the last time they did that 6 months ago or 5 months ago, it only came back up after. So we'll get your view on the future of that here. But right now, let's go ahead and talk to George in Connecticut. You're on the air with Max Keiser. Thanks for holding.
I have a question for Max, but I also have some hope for you. I'll give you the hope quick. I was listening to a very left-wing New York station, and it was an Occupy Wall Street, and they're talking about Ron Paul, and lots of people are giving upbeat things, so that there's the hope that there may be a joining at some point. The question for Max, though, is that I'm wondering, every time they drive down gold and silver, on the GLD and SLV. Is that maybe we can use that as an opportunity to buy the real stuff? Say, look, they're pushing it down. Switch from GLD and SLV. Buy the real stuff. Then it makes less in the market, and also then we secure a lower price at the same time for that product. What do you think, Max?
Yeah, that's what's happening. That's what people are doing. They're getting out of the paper gold, which includes GLD and SLV, and they're buying the physical gold and silver, and that's what's happening. And the demand for gold and silver is still extraordinarily high all around the world. So yeah, they're shifting out of the paper, they're moving into the physical, and at some point, the physical will start to be traded at quotes. They'll be priced in a completely separate from the paper. So you'll have two markets. You'll have the physical market will be trading at one price, and then they'll have the paper market trading at a completely
And so are you
price.
looking for a boomerang? Because it'll go down for a while as the paper market collapses, which is happening because no one trusts MF Global. And I guess that's why the head of it, the head of the CME group's having to come out and cry uncle, because they do see it literally across commodities markets are going down because of loss of confidence. Then I guess as everybody then rushes into physical, could that push it then up a lot?
Well, yeah. Also, it's also strong hands. These are physical cash buyers. So the world is moving in a very stealthy fashion to a gold standard. You know, gold vending machines are now all over the world. People own gold, and we're becoming a gold-oriented society. So the central banks trying to avoid that from happening by increasing margin accounts, by screwing around with GLD, they're bringing in a stealth gold standard anyway. So they're hoisted by their own petard. You know, they don't understand that this is not stopping people from buying gold and silver. And my target of 5,000 on gold is the same as it was 7 years ago, 8 years ago. I haven't changed that target as my interim target.
Sure, we've seen them drive it down many times, and it's the same game. George, thank you for the call. Good points. Good question. Let's go ahead and talk to Chuck in Virginia. You're on the air, Chuck.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Max. My question is, using Max's analogy earlier, with J.P. Morgan putting a gun to Corzine's head, when America leaves China hanging with the $2 trillion in debt, do you think China will put a gun to America's head by virtue of like a Chinese Red Dawn?
Well, I think that you already have incredible influence in American policy from China. Certainly in the monetary policy and in the financial policies, China's got incredible influence. And going forward, we see China lining themselves up with Iran and Russia more than the United States. So that block of countries, Iran, China, Russia, are consolidating their relationships and doing lots of deals with together. And so the U.S., of course, is sticking with Britain and Israel. I mean, that's going to be the loser going forward against China, Russia, Iran. I mean, think about it. They've got all the oil and gas. They've got all the gold and silver. They've got all the money. So who are you going to make a bet? China, Russia, Iran, or America and Israel? I take the...
Yeah, America and Israel and England run by the most larcenous con men undoubtedly the world has ever seen. William K. Black agrees, others. The greatest fraud ever. And they're waging war against our own countries, from Israel to the U.S., are all occupied by basically military dictatorships with a little fake government out front. And you're right, Russia and China and others were heavily invested, especially China. They wanted to be part of the New World Order. They were offered, and now they've been sold derivatives and crud, so their president is threatening war with the U.S. now in Reuters, but it's not even on the nightly news. I mean, that shows you how crazy the world's gotten, and that even the Communist Party of China is now freaked out about who's running the U.S. Because these bankers are so sure of themselves, are so hubris drunk, that who knows what they'll do.
Well, I'm in that camp. And they have got the resources. They're in Africa securing resources in the case of China, where the U.S. is blowing money on weapons to try to secure energy resources. It's a completely inefficient way to do that. And the next world war is not going to be fought with tanks and rockets. It's a currency war. And it's going to be fought with derivatives. And countries with actual resources behind these derivatives are going to do better than the U.S., which is just, in the U.K. and Israel, they're just printing debt. So it's going to be debt versus real resources, and I think real resources are going to prevail.
And by the way, that's why, and I told people this for a decade or more, from the manuals, the drills, I've documented it, but now they're admitting they are lining up the U.S. military after farmers and ranchers. That's who they train to take on, and that's who they're now using Predator drones on. I mean, why are they so scared of farmers and ranchers, Max?
Well, I guess because they're afraid of anybody who's independent in any way. Farmers and ranchers are independent because they have an independent source of income, and they're not reliant on the government to that extent. So that's obviously a threat to the central planners in Washington.
Wow, we're going to come back, and I'm going to keep it till 5 after, and we're going to let you go. And for a whole hour into the next, we're going to have a very interesting guest in studio with us. Max Keiser is our guest. We're going to break, but just briefly, Max, when do you expect gold to go back up?
Well, you know, that's the timing on gold and silver is something that people should stop trying to time it. And I've always said the best way is to give yourself a dollar cost averaging. So every month you go in with the same amount of money. So here this month when it's being attacked, you go in with that same amount of money, and you're going to end up buying more.
All right, we'll be right back. Stay there, Max. Spens is going to be joining us coming up at 8 after. He was a colonel in the East German military and was part of the stand down that basically led to the fall of the Berlin Wall. He's going to be in studio with us. I appreciate him traveling from where he lives in Texas to Austin. That's coming up. We've got 2 segments left with Max Keiser, this short one, and one more short one to go to phone calls here. Let's go ahead and go to Info in Maryland. You're on the air, Info.
Hi, Max. How you doing?
Good.
I kind of agree with Max Keiser about the whole MF Global thing with Corzine. The fact that he was able, the fact that he had to lie because, you know, his family might be in danger and they held a gun to his head and stuff like that. I mean, what could you absolutely do?
All right, I appreciate your call. We have to expose these criminals. It's a moral issue, and this is an educational thing. It shows us that our government is criminal and out of control and illegitimate, and that we need to fix it. Max Keiser, your comment.
It's a replay of Enron. Remember Enron? We learned about the special purpose entity accounts, over 700 off-balance sheet accounts that they use to fund their fraud. Now we're learning about hypothecation and rehypothecation. It's essentially the same game. After Enron, I think their chairman blew his head off. He killed himself, I believe. Somebody else went to jail. The stock went to zero. $80 billion got wiped out. In the case of J.P. Morgan, I think we're going to see the same thing. Chairman could blow his head off. Stock goes to zero. Someone's going to go to jail. It's a replay.
But much bigger.
It's a $160 billion company. Enron was $80 billion. So on a pure stock play, it's twice as big, but it's systemically glued into the system.
But yeah, but that's a side issue because it's the derivatives. The Ponzi scheme has infected everything. And so we're basically talking about the bullet that shot a hole in us instead of talking about the bullet hole.
Well, J.P. Morgan, of course, their debts are not held on their balance sheet. Their debts are held by the Fed. So if Jamie Dimon and J.P. Morgan blows up, so does the Fed. Now, a lot of people will cheer that. Of course, even Ron Paul will cheer that. He'll say that's probably the greatest thing that could happen is for J.P. Morgan and the Fed to simply blow themselves up, which would be a nice end to a 100-year run as a vicious financial crook in this country.
We're going to go to break and come back with 3 or 4 more calls and then let Max Keiser go and bring in our next guest who's going to be in studio. But here's a headline. Ron Paul outlines his campaign secret weapon on the radio show with us yesterday. Steve Watson has an article on that. He's now in a dead tie with Newt Gingrich. And as people learn how dirty Gingrich is, he is falling like a rock. Now, your view on Newt Gingrich?
I'm in Europe. I've been here for 10 years now. I've lived in France for 14 years. I don't follow regional, local, little American elections that closely. I mean, Ron Paul's a great guy. I hope he does well. But other than that, it's a too small a country.
Yeah, the point is that look at who the Republicans put forward. I mean, this is a top globalist minion. This is a Mr. Selling Influence, Mr. Crooked. He moves like a weather vane, depending on how the wind blows. And that's who Ron Paul, the statesman, has to fight with. I mean, it should be a no-brainer, Max.
Yeah, well, you're talking about voters in a country where they're very